Media controls. Okay, everyone, welcome to Beyond Right, the values that shape Judaism civil code. We've discussed many topics in the past 4 lessons. We discussed personal liberty. We discussed the idea of doing somebody a favor is a mandate if it comes at no personal expense, and many other interesting ideas that we discussed in previous lessons. And today we're going to discuss the idea of personal property. And it could sound, you might think it's very dry, but it's actually quite fascinating. So let's start off with some case studies, and then we'll go into it. So I want you to judge these case studies on your intuition. So case number 1. Imagine that David and Mark are friendly work colleagues. One day, David is terribly hungry at work and in a terrible rush to boot. He notices that Mark had stored some food in the office refrigerator, but Mark is out of the office and unreachable. David reasons that since Mark is absent, he does not feed, and he knows he doesn't plan to come back to work that day, so he does not need the food, and he can replace it for him tomorrow. Considering the circumstances and their general friendly relationship, David is certain that Mark would allow him to eat this food. In your opinion, may David eat Mark's food? This is it happens all the time. This is happens. What do you think?
Not without permission.
But he knows that David wouldn't mind. He knows that he wouldn't mind. But you're saying if he doesn't have permission, he can't reach him. He's trying to get his permission. He's trying. He's unreachable. He knows that David probably wouldn't mind. He's going to run downstairs after work to the same store, the same cafeteria that prepared that lunch, get another pack, replace it before he comes back.
I think it's okay if they explicitly have said to each other,
But there's no explicit. There's no explicit. No?
You never know what's going to happen.
I think it would depend on the relationship that those two people
They
have.
have an excellent relationship, an amazing relationship. The only thing that's
What if
missing here.
What if he comes back early and he's hungry and then there's nothing left and his friend never ended up going to the store until much later?
What?
You should eat half of it in case he comes back.
What if he left the food there, didn't eat it, and the food rotted, and then when the guy shows up the next day, he's got rotten food as opposed to new fresh food?
So he's actually doing
What
something
else could go on forever?
fresh food. Newer batch food. What? Okay. Let's examine case study B. We have so far what I'm feeling from the room is that if you don't ask permission, you can't. There is a thinking that if the food is going to go spoiled, or that might be a difference. That might be an incentive to say, actually, in that case, maybe it's reasonable. And we also got the idea, it depends how strong the relationship is. But others pushed back and said, even if you're very close, if there's not explicit instructions, permission, then it's a slippery slope. You might forget. Okay, let's look at case study B. Sarah is walking in the street and discovers a bracelet lying on the sidewalk. She tries her hardest to figure out, she walks into the nearest shops. Anyone know whose bracelet this is? Nobody knows. Can she keep the bracelet?
It's the same thing with money. If there's no one around, if there's someone around, she would have to ask if this bracelet belongs to you.
There's no one around. She doesn't know.
She should probably put up a sign or take some other effort to reach out beyond just going to the store.
Let's say she puts up a sign, she puts it on Craigslist, she puts it on the local next door neighbors app or whatever, and nobody steps forward. So can she keep it? She can keep it.
I think so.
What?
I've had this situation before where I couldn't find the person, but then I decided, it was once a hat and gloves, that I would leave it where I found it, thinking maybe the person would go back with it.
They think you leave it there. And then,
I didn't know where they were. I didn't know them, so I put it back.
okay, interesting, very interesting. Maybe don't pick it up at all, because that will make it harder for the person to reclaim it. So some are saying, no, you could pick it up, you could find there's keepers. Fine.
My
Let's look at-
husband found right outside the bank an envelope, and inside the envelope was a lot of cash. And for some reason, there was an address on the envelope, and it could have been like a complete random's address. And my husband said, I'll take a chance. He sent it to that address. And then we got a letter. It was pretty wild. We got a letter from someone not Jewish, and they send us the statue with like a prayer pose and a card saying like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like he could have taken it, right?
I don't know
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that. There could be a camera there. Rabbi, just so you know, I lived in Japan for some time, off and on, because of my late husband's career. And there it's actually shocking. People, if they drop their wallets, in my case, I actually lost my sunglasses. And I didn't realize that until about an hour later. And the woman I was with, she was an expatriate, said, don't worry about it. They have wallets up there on the edge of buildings. If you dropped your glasses, don't worry, no one's going to step on it. They're going to pick it up, put it on a ledge. And if you walk in Japan, you'll see wallets with money hanging out. And
Is that-
no one takes anything. It stays up there until the owner comes back if there's no identification in the wallet.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting thing in Japan. You bring it to the local police kiosk. There's a bunch of kiosks all over town, and you return it there. They hold it, and then when you and after a certain time, the item's not claimed. You get to claim it for yourself. Okay, very good. Okay, let's go on to case number 3, case C.
What page
Okay,
are we
so-
on, Rabbi? Because
We're on page 137. Okay, I'm gonna read a lot of the text in case people don't have their student books. So case C. This is interesting. Sarah is in her terminal on checking it, coming off her flight, and she's looking, and she sees that Sarah, what's the name here? That Naomi dropped her bracelet into the gutter, into the drain system. And Naomi's trying hard to get it out. She can't. A few people come over to lift the grate. There's no one, and her flight is running late. She's disappointed and stressed out, but she gets on her flight to Japan. And now you see this, you go home, and you're thinking about it. Poor lady, she lost her bracelet, and you're like, I wonder, is it possible to get it? And you're discussing it with your husband, and your husband says, actually, I have a tool, or I know a guy, we can lift the grate. And so you go back, you lift the grate, you get out the bracelet, and now your question is, can you keep it? You know who the owner is, but she gave up on it. Can you keep it?
You're not supposed to keep it now.
You're not supposed to keep it?
That's because you know who the owner is.
But you don't have to track them down, you know them.
You saw her, maybe you know her on she's an acquaintance. What? She gave up on it.
Yeah, but had she known you could open it, she wouldn't give up on it.
To try to find her, but you know who.
Okay, so we're going to examine these cases through Torah view, but first let's go through the main theories about
Rabbi, I'm
prophecy.
having trouble hearing you. I don't know why.
Can everyone else hear me online?
I'm having a hard time too. You're very attenuated.
Let me see if I can fix the sound. I apologize for that. Does this bring any improvement? No, not at all.
Nope.
Let me try one more thing.
Yeah, I could turn you up so I hear you, but then when anybody else talks, it blasts me out.
Second.
Rabbi, while you're doing it, I'm just gonna
Mhm.
tell a little story. When I was in Israel a few months ago, and we were packing up to go somewhere, we were in the car. My husband didn't realize that I had brought like this big shopping bag, and I thought.
How's this mic? Is this mic an improvement? Testing,
Yes.
testing.
Yes, that's better.
Okay, excellent. Okay, glad we found the solution. Okay, so, and hold on, you want to finish the story? Finish the
I
story.
was just gonna say, 5 hours later,
Mhm.
I was like, wow, where's my bag? And we were like panicking because there were a lot of important things. We drove back, it was in the same exact spot, untouched in the parking lot. Wow. Yeah, it was shocked. Yeah, I was shocked, but
Things like that though do happen in Israel.
yeah, it happens to be a very religious
But-
area. And
But I have to say, even in when I was growing up in Siyasa, we once went on a family trip for a few days, and we left the garage wide open, and it was like that for like 2 days. And then the neighbor thought like they probably didn't realize, so he closed it, and nothing was taken. So even in even our local neighborhood is quite careful and integrity of other people's property. Okay, so let's take a look. So we're going to take a look exactly what is ownership, the theory of ownership, and how it actually works. The most common views and theories of ownership. You know, in some places, in some cultures, ownership is very loose. You know, people don't own anything. Everyone gets to use things, but no one owns things. And those are maybe indigenous Indian reserves, other people. But most cultures, for the most part, do believe in property ownership. Even communist countries do believe in property ownership, except for the means of production. The means of production, they say that's a communal thing, but people get paid at work and they get to own their car and other things. So this idea of people owning things for most civilizations in the world is very intuitive. But the question is why? You know, what makes something yours? What is the mechanism? Why is it yours? So the first theory is called social convention. It's basically everyone agrees that you get to own it. Because we agree that you own it, that's why you own it. It's not as if your phone has some connection to you inherently or ontologically is the fancy word. It's just we decide we're going to track this to you. It's almost like the patent system. You have an idea, but creative ideas you don't really own, but we decide in order to create incentives for people to invest in new ideas, we let people patent it, and the government says, okay, you patented it, it belongs to you for a certain amount of time. That time expires, but every country makes their own patent laws. However, and the same thing works for your personal property. You own your house, you don't really own your house. I don't mean the bank owns your house, but I'm saying even besides that, you have the deed to your house. Okay, that's because we all agree that it's your house. There's no, and this is summarized succinctly. Hobbes and Hume argue that there is no natural mine or thine, and that property must be understood as the creation of the sovereign state, or at the very least, the artificial product of a convention entered into by all members of the society to bestow stability and on the possession of external goods and leave everyone in the peaceable enjoyment of what he may acquire by his fortune and industry. So that's one classic model. Social construct. My ownership is determined by the law. But then there's a second model, and this is less intuitive to people, but this is John Locke. He writes, on the other hand, was adamant that property could have been instituted in a state of nature without any special conventions or political decisions. Locke did not base his resolution of this difficulty on any theory of universal, even tacit consent. Instead, in the most famous passage of his chapter on property, he gave a moral defense of the legitimacy of unilateral appropriation. And this is the quote. Though the earth be common to all men, yet every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. Whatsoever then he removes out of the state that nature hath provided and left it in, he hath mixed his labor with and joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. It being by him removed from the common state nature placed it in, it hath by this labor something annexed to it. That excludes the common right of other men. In other words, in his view, you own your body, you own your efforts. When you come to a land and you invest in that land, so because you own your work, so that land, that investment in the land also belongs to you as well. And therefore, your money belongs to you because you invested and therefore you got money. And therefore, your right to buy a house with that money, it all traces back to your ownership over yourself. So you own yourself, therefore you own any real investment that any improvement you make in the world. And it's not just a social construct, he argues. And for the most part, there's not such a big difference in reality between the two views, except in edge cases like eminent domain, the view of eminent domain. Is that an ethical law or not? If you believe that all property ownership is a social construct, so ethics doesn't get into the picture. It's all a social construct. So whatever the society decides, that is the ethical thing. But if you take the ontological view that we look at the essence of this land belongs to you. It's not just a construct. It actually, you have a connection to it because you own your body and therefore your investment in the land belongs to you. Therefore, the government has no right to take it away, or at least to take it away without fairly compensating you for it. And so these are the areas where it makes a difference. It's unethical for a government to do it, or is it ethical? Then it's not black and white. In each faction, you have a bunch of sub-factions. So it's hard to know exactly on each case where the theories would land, but there is such a difference. And intuitively, which ones do you connect with? What's your view on the matter? Is property ownership a social construct or an ontological reality? Ontological? The latter?
I think it's a combination.
Right.
I can be a combination because some things are determined by law.
You're on mute. If you're speaking. Yeah.
Mostly social.
Well,
Okay.
I like the idea of the ontological, although it seems like even though we own it, we pay for it, we tend to our land, according to like Judaism, is it really ours?
Okay. So and let's try to apply the theories to our edge cases, to our cases that we presented in the beginning. Okay, then that's exercise 5.1 on page 140. So according to the view that it's a social construct, may David eat Mark's food? You could say it's not really stealing because really the whole purpose is for the benefit of society. So if you could guarantee that he will be able to replace his food, and we're not worried that he actually won't follow through on his promise to actually replace the food, it's no big deal, because it's not as if the person who bought the lunch originally actually owns the lunch. Doesn't really own it. But if we take it for him, it's going to cause chaos. But if we're able to return it to him, it's not such a big deal. However, if you take the ontological position, then no, without prior express permission, you're taking something out of his ownership without permission. That's theft, no matter what your intentions are. And again, you could argue in each camp that it's actually not the case, and each group might agree, but fine. Now, may Sarah keep the bracelet? He found the bracelet and tried to find the owner, couldn't find it, couldn't find the owner. Can she keep it? So if you believe in the social construct, what would you say?
No.
That
No?
That's not acceptable, that she should, try to contact an authority or something?
Doesn't it
Because
just
it
have
goes according to the law.
where, it doesn't each,
Each culture, you figure out what's a culture norm. In some cultures, finders keepers. In other cultures, okay, so it's very local based. Every culture has their own rules, and there's nothing more ethical about this country, this state law versus that state law. Every state can make their own decision about what happens when things are lost and you can't find the owner. Fine. What about the ontological reality? You find something, you find the bracelet and you can't find the owner. So what happens to the bracelet? What should you do with it?
yours.
It's yours to keep. But there's a ontological relationship between the bracelet and the original owner.
You've done everything you can to find the owner and you can't find her.
Okay. Okay. And case number C, where Leah sees Naomi's bracelet being dropped in the gutter at the airport, and she comes back later to retrieve it, and she knows that Naomi gave up on the bracelet. Can she keep it?
Same answer for both.
If it's a social construct, you'd say depends on the local norm. And if it's ontological reality, you'll say maybe it's Naomi's bracelet. Is that what you say? It's her.
A little bit more of an obligation to locate the person, but
Yeah.
once you have tried to not,
Now there's a man who lost his wallet, and he knew which part he lost it in. So he went back. He got up on the PA system and said, it was a full packed house. Whoever finds my wallet, I'll give them $50. So someone calls out, I'll offer 75. Everyone's is like, if this guy's offering 50, I'd rather someone give it to me. Okay, so let's take a look at the Jewish view. You ready? And this is one of the most strange stories in the Torah, and it starts with a mysterious wrestling bout with our great-grandfather of all Jews. His name was Yaakov. His name was Yisrael. His name was Jacob. His name was Israel. At this point in the history, he's called Jacob. He's running away. He ran away from home because his older twin brother wanted to kill him. Because he arranged that he should get the blessings instead of his older brother, and Esau wanted to kill him. So he ran away. 20 years later, he ran away to Lebanon, Syria, Turkey area, and he marries his cousin. He fathers 11 of the 12 tribes. It's 20 years later. He became very wealthy. He says, I think it's time to come back home. On his way back home, he hears a report that Esau is coming with 400 men, 400 weaponized men. And he's very nervous. So he divides his camp into two camps. He's crossing over the river. And then we get to this point in the story. So let's read text 3. Jacob took his family and transported them across the stream, and then he brought his possessions across. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. At the end of the story, we find out that this man was actually an angel of God, and they were having a wrestle, and it was a very symbolic wrestle, which point of view is the right view? Is it Esau's point of view, or is it Jacob's point of view? And this was the angel of Esau, and that was the battle, a whole mysterious event. What's interesting is Jacob had a big camp. It wasn't just him and his family. It says he had 2 camps. He had other people with him. So why was he alone? Why was he alone? So the Talmud says in text 4, Rabbi Eliezer explains that the reason Jacob found himself alone and exposed to danger was because he had returned to get small jars that had remained behind. This episode informs us that righteous individuals cherish their possessions more than their own bodies. Why do they care so much? For they never touch stolen property. This is so strange, very, very strange. We would think of a spiritual person like Jacob not to be so materialistic. So why is he so careful about his possessions? And yet the Talmud says, actually, this is not just Jacob. It's not just, oh, Jacob had a mishigas. He was a little, this was one of his shtick, his craziness. No, all righteous people cherish their possessions more than their own bodies. There's a strange story in the Talmud. There was once a man who needed the prayers of a certain. There was no rain, so the farmers were, desperate for rain, and so they asked the rabbis for advice, and they said, "Oh, there's actually a holy man that lives. He's a farmer, but he's very holy, and get him to pray for you, and that might be the key." And when they went to greet him, he didn't want to. He was in the middle of working, and he didn't want to talk to them. And so they said, "Okay, we'll talk to you when you get home." So they're watching him, and when he's walking, walking home, there's like this thorns on the way, and he lifts up his clothing, and he's getting cut by the thorns. And they're wondering, why is he doing that? Why doesn't he just leave his clothing? He'll protect his things. And then he comes home, and then they ask him, "Why didn't you want to talk?" He says, "Because I work for somebody else. I didn't want to waste that guy's time. He's paying me for the minute. I can't just talk on the job." "And what about your clothing?" So he applied this principle. He says, "My clothing, if it rips, I can't repair. But my body, if I get a cut, it'll heal itself." And he say, "Yeah, but on clothing, was he really so poor that he needed his clothing?" But it's really this same principle that righteous individuals cherish their possessions more than their own bodies, which is so strange until you know the Kabbalah, the mysticism behind the statement. But it's this idea, it's very strange statements. Anyone have a proposal? How do you make sense of this? No, good, okay.
Can I make a comment, Rabbi?
Sure.
I thought it was understood, or a Jewish concept, that when we work, we buy things, okay? And it becomes our soul kind of enters that which we purchase, becomes part of whom we are. So we value what we have because it represents what we are, the things we pick out. It evidences our hard labor, and it represents our life. So over time, these material items, it's not that it rules us, but we value what we have, and it's part of what we value as we, when we live on in the earth, and the things that we purchase, it becomes part of, it represents who we are to a degree.
So you're alluding to the answer, and we're going to go spend a few minutes to get to the core of this idea. So let's look at text from Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is the founder of a Chassidic movement, and he wrote this idea, or is recorded by one of his students, who wrote a teaching of his. And it goes as follows. The Torah, and on page 143, the Torah is highly protective of people's personal assets. This is a result of the major spiritual principle that whichever material items we use, the garments we wear, the food we eat, or the utensils we utilize, we derive benefit from the spiritual force present within each item. For the existence of that item is sustained by the virtue of the spiritual presence within it. Specific sparks of spirituality are embedded within each item, and through divine providence, items that are used by particular individuals harbor the specific sparks that are related to their soul. As a result, when we use a utensil, eat food, or wear a garment to satisfy our corporeal needs, we thereby repair the spiritual sparks embedded within them, because we subsequently serve God with the energy that our body acquired through that item. We must therefore be highly protective of our possessions, of whatever we own out of concern for the individualized spiritual forces they possess. So the Baal Shem Tov is saying, you bought your phone. It's not just, you think the reason you bought it is because you want the latest gadget, or you want to stand out, or you need it for work. Those are external motivations, but it's not the internal motivation. The internal soul motivation is that there's some divine energy within that specific phone that you have a connection to, your soul has a connection to, and your soul needs that item either to use that item in a godly way or to gain the benefits of that item for a productive reason. And we see this concept all the time. If you're a parent, you surely know this, that your kid is in a funny mood, he's hitting everyone, he's screaming, he's yelling, and you say, why are you fighting? Why are you yelling? And they give all these reasons. But deep down, we know, what is the real reason? Maybe he's craving attention, right? He's craving bonding, right? And it would be a mistake for the parent to say, oh, he's behaving badly, let me send him to his room. Maybe we have to do that in the moment as a Band-Aid, but that's not really what he needs. What he really needs is what he really seeks, but he's too little to know what he really seeks inside. So he thinks he hates his brother, but really his internal motivation might be that he's seeking some connection, some energy from the parent. When a parent sees a child behaving badly, all of a sudden the parent comes close, maybe grabs the arm, raises the voice. For the child, it's like some energy, some connection, maybe negative energy, but it's something. A few minutes ago, my parent was in a different world. I had no touch. I had no attention. Now I got something. So when we know what the internal motivation is, we do things properly. The same thing is with food. If we're, maybe we skipped a meal or we didn't eat properly in the morning, and then we get a insulin drop or we get hungry. So if we don't realize the reason is because we're trying to gain nutrition, so our instinct is to go for a sugary candy, right? But we don't realize what's really motivating this is really we're seeking nutrition. And therefore we should be focused not on filling our stomachs with junk, but on what will provide the real thing that our body is looking for. And the same way that it works for the body, it also works for the soul. So let's say you want a piece of cake. Don't think it's just a sweet tooth. It's actually maybe a soul calling to that cake. Could be. Maybe the soul calling is for you not to eat the cake or to eat it. So you have to figure out exactly what the soul calling is. But don't write it off, because it could be there's some intrinsic connection between that piece of clothing that you want to buy in the mall or that item. That is the relationship. So we know there's this famous Japanese lady, I don't remember her name, that she had this idea that you should only keep items in your house if they spark joy. Anyone know who I'm talking about? What's her name?
Yeah, is she the minimalist?
Yeah, the minimalist.
Yeah, I have her book. Yeah.
I don't remember her name. Okay,
I have her book,
so
yeah.
yes, this idea, only have things in your house that spark joy. We have so many things in our house that clutter and they frazzle the mind. She says, only have things in your house that spark joy. And Judaism actually twists it a little bit. Everything that you have in your house, you should use to bring a spark of joy to your soul and to God and to the world. So it's a different, instead of, oh, this doesn't spark joy in me, let me throw it out. Maybe the answer is, it doesn't spark joy in me. So how can I bring joy from this item? How can I make sure this item is used for the right purpose? And maybe that means gifting it. Maybe it means keeping it. So if you have books in your house and you say, I don't read these books, so let me get rid of it. Judaism says, hold on. You don't read it. Maybe you should read it. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's why you own this item, is so you should read it. Very few people in the world, righteous souls, know exactly their soul connection to every item and their soul's mission in the world. There's a few. And so they go over to the places that they know their mission is. They walk to the item. They eat the things that they know they need to eat. But for most of us, we're blind to this. And God makes us, through his divine providence, bump into scenarios that we need to be there. So let's say we got hired in a job, or we lost a job and we got transferred across country. We think it's an accident, or we think our flight is late, we're stuck. To God, no, this is exactly where you need to be right now. God arranges us to be in the places where we need to be to fulfill our soul's mission in the world. And the same thing is with our possessions. Every single possession that we have has a special link to us, and we have to figure out how to have that possession spark joy in the world, or spark godliness, reveal its true identity.
It's interesting, but it's a very individual thing, because like in Chabad, you don't decorate the sukkah because the sukkah itself brings you joy. And then other communities decorate it up the wazoo because the sukkah is so simple, they want to decorate it. And then you see families who live simply, which is okay. And then families who really want like the schmaltzy, overdone, kiddish cups. And
in the synagogue, how we should decorate our synagogues is this big debate. Some people are of the view that synagogues should be as plain as possible, because the more simple, the less distraction. If you have very ornate furniture, then everyone's looking at the furniture, at the stained glass windows, everyone's getting distracted. Other people said, no, having a beautiful place actually broadens the mind. So it is very individual exactly how items should spark joy in us, either by their absence or by owning them. But we definitely have a mitzvah to be organized with our stuff and not to be cluttered. And there are expressions in the Talmud. It says the difference between a sage and a simple person is that a sage, under his bed, there's nothing except in the winter is his rain shoes, and in the summer is his sandals. Versus a messy person has everything under their bed, all different types of stuff. So there's this idea of going down to the basics, not being overly, and Pirkei Avot says more stuff, more worries, right? The more things you have, the more anxiety you have, the more worries. So there is this idea of simplifying, but don't just throw things out. Think, how can I utilize this to the maximum? And that's an important value. And maybe this could be another reason why, especially in the Ashkenazi communities, our ancestors hoarded a lot. Part of it was probably due to the war. And maybe therefore they never took a moment to actually contemplate, okay, what am I doing with all this stuff? How can I utilize all this stuff? But some of it might have been this deep Jewish value of making sure everything goes to full use. Everything gets its full use and full connection. In the tabernacle, when it came to transportation of the tabernacle, so the princes of the tabernacle, this was from last week's Torah portion that we read in Shul, they donated 6 wagons. Now, 6 wagons to carry the whole tabernacle, it was a perfect fit. So much so that they had to go slower to make sure things wouldn't fall off, because everything was exactly perfect. And the question is, these princes of each tribe were very wealthy. Why didn't they offer more wagons? Instead of loading each wagon 100%, load each wagon 80%, 70%. You don't have to fill up the cup to the top, fill up the cup 70%. But it's this idea of utilizing everything to the fullest. And that's why there's a Kabbalistic custom, that when you make Kiddush on wine, or you do Havdalah, you fill up the cup to the top with wine. You're saying, you're alcoholic, you're messy. No, but it's the idea, using everything to the fullest potential. Okay? So once possessions contain individual spiritual sparks, we must elevate those sparks by using them to serve God. Now, my body and my organs must match. An organ transplant must be compatible. And the same thing is, my soul and my possessions must match. Transference of ownership must fit the spiritual network. So this is another reason why you can't steal from somebody else. It's not just that you're depriving them of things that they paid for. It's also, this thing is on the wrong network. It's on the wrong soul network. You took something that belongs to a different soul, network, and now you put it onto your soul network and it doesn't belong there. And so this is the deeper reason why Jacob had a few small containers on the other side of the river, went back there to get them. He says, I can't waste them, and he could have thought, who cares? A few small jugs. But he said, no, I didn't utilize those jugs yet to its purpose. And maybe the reason that God put them here, or maybe Jacob knew directly that this was part of his mission because he was on that level to know. Any questions? Is this fascinating? This is a fascinating idea to me. Okay, so
Rabbi, is the person you were referring to before Marie Kondo,
Yes.
the Japanese
Yeah.
woman?
Yeah, Marie Kondo. Yeah. Yeah. So it's
Very
slightly.
interesting.
Yeah. So righteous individuals cherish their spiritual possessions more than their own materialistic bodies. They don't actually cherish possessions more than their bodies because they have a soul, like the items have souls, so to speak. Items have sparks, connection to our soul, but they value the spiritual force in that item more than their material exertion or comfort. So if it causes them, they have to make another trip to get those items back. If they think that that item has spiritual use that their soul needs to utilize, then they say, I'll take the effort. I'll make the effort, even though I'd rather sleep a little bit. Or move on my journey, get to my destination a little quicker. I'm actually going to make the effort to get my containers back. So let's take this to the next step. So it comes out, Judaism's take is that ownership is a very real thing. It's like a degree further than the ontological construct. The ontological construct of John Locke was this idea, you worked for it, therefore it's yours. This view says, even if you didn't work for it, it's yours inherently. It's part of your network. This is what your soul is here to do. Okay, my possessions are mine because my divine essence is connected to them. This is the Jewish view, and this will explain all our case studies. Let's look at case study A. Can you take Mark's lunch? Of course not. It's on his network to elevate, not on your network. If you get permission, so then that's a divine sign that, yeah, you can move. This item is able to move networks. But without permission, you have no right to take it off the network. It's not your network. Okay? So consuming something without the owner's advance permission is stealing. Now, it would be good advice for friends to have a chat and say, you know what? If you ever know that I'm not going to return, I don't mind. Giving advance permission is a beautiful thing. But in the case where no advance permission was given, even they're your best friend and they'll have nachas that you ate their lunch. They love that you ate their cookies that they made and you enjoy their cookies. No. It's just an interesting thing. There was okay, I'm going to say it, but I don't know if everyone will get the nuance of the humor in it. But there was a kollel. A kollel is where young men study Torah after they get married before they move on to their life's journey. So you devote a year or two to studying Torah full time. So you bring added holiness or spiritual foundation to your marriage, to your life. And so one man brings a little bottle of milk every day to the kollel, to the fridge, the communal fridge. And whenever he comes back, someone took his milk every day. So he writes on the milk, he puts, it's commandment number 7 in the 10 commandments, do not steal. He writes in big letters. He puts it on the milk, he comes back the next day, the milk is gone. He puts on, he changes the font, he quotes other sources, do not steal. The next day, it's missing. Then he comes up with an idea. Everyone in this kollel is very religious. They only eat a certain high standard of dairy. So he changes it. This milk is not Chalav Yisrael. It's not of this high standard. And sure enough, it wasn't touched. But that illustrates the misunderstanding of how Torah views milk. This milk does not belong to your network. You'll say it's not a big deal. It's just a milk. It's just 50 cents. Doesn't matter the value. I mean,
Hold on.
in a
I want to
degree,
make sure that I'm on,
as long as it's a few, as
I'm
long
on,
as it's worth more than a dime,
on mute, okay?
it's on your network.
Am I
Let's
muted,
look.
guys?
You're unmuted.
Okay, I have to figure out how to mute me. Okay. Hold on.
Should I mute you? I can mute
Yes,
you.
please mute me, Rabbi.
Okay, so let's look at Jewish law. Now we're going to the case of return. So before we do that, let's read some text inside. Let's go to text, text 6. Yeah.
You're saying that people were taking the milk were going against Jewish law, but
They were going against Jewish law for sure. They were stealing. But when he told them, you're stealing, that didn't change people's mindset. It wasn't a case that happened in my kollel. It was a case we heard of. Someone was saying the humor, that sometimes people are religious and then forget about the basics of ethics. Fine. So if you enter a private orchard, this is from Code of Jewish Law. If you enter a private orchard or garden, you may not pick its fruit without express permission from its owner. This applies even if the owner of the orchard is your dear friend and will certainly be extremely pleased to hear that you enjoy their fruits. Nevertheless, since the owner is unaware of your actions in real time, it is forbidden to benefit from the fruit. This principle applies in all similar cases. The public must be cautioned regarding this law because it is commonly transgressed due to lack of awareness. Okay? And that was obvious when I asked the case. There was some seesaw. People weren't so sure whether we're allowed to take the lunch from the fridge. We're going to return it. We're going to replace it. And the Code of Jewish Law is saying, make sure the public knows that this is violating the sin of theft and it's based on this value system of the spiritual connection between our possessions and us. Now let's go to the case of returning items. Okay, there's a special mitzvah to pick things up. When you see things that are lost, you have an obligation to go take it and find the owner and return it. You cannot just say, I'm leaving it there. Now, you brought up an interesting case where you said maybe leaving it there will actually help the owner retrieve it. And you actually said that your bag, you were able to get it back from the exact same place, so no one touched it. So there is a certain common sense that maybe you should leave it with a local storekeeper who's local and say, okay, I want you to, in case somebody doesn't come back. But you have a responsibility. If you see something's lost, it becomes your mitzvah. You cannot just walk by and say, I'm in a hurry. I'm not in the mood. No, it's your mitzvah to find the owner or to do everything to restore the owner. Let's look at text number 7. Okay? At common law, this is we're looking at the legal law. At common law, a person, this is not Torah. This is second. At common law, a person who found lost personal property could keep it until and unless the original owner comes forward. You're entitled to keep it until someone says it's actually mine. This rule applied to people who discovered lost property in public areas, as well as to people who discovered lost property on their own property. Many jurisdictions have statutes that modify the common law's treatments of lost property. Typically, these statutes require lost personal property to be turned over to a government official, and that if the property is not claimed within a set period of time, it goes to the finder, and the original owner's rights to the property are terminated. Okay? Now let's compare that with Torah law. Text 8, we're going to look inside the Chumash, into the Torah itself. Deuteronomy chapter 22. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it. Be sure to return it to its owner. If the owner is not near you, or if you do not know the owner's identity, take it home with you and keep it until they come for it, whereupon you shall return it. Do the same if you find their donkey, garment, or anything else that they have lost. You may not ignore it. So, let's look how that compares. In Jewish law, it's forbidden to ignore lost property. In secular law, You have the choice to pick up what is lost. In Jewish law, you have a personal requirement to actively return lost property. In secular law, no action required of the finder. And thirdly, no end date to returning lost property. This is radical. If you find something, you have to find the owner forever. There's some exceptions, we'll get to that. But if you find something, you have to hold on to it, and you cannot use it personally until the owner is found. Okay? However, in secular law, if not claimed after a while, the lost property can be kept. You stop that.
A donkey or an ox or any live animal.
Nobody says a garment.
A garment.
The Torah says, do the same if you find a donkey, garment, or anything else that they have lost.
But the obligation to bring it home, hold on to it, which also means in some cases take care of it.
Yeah.
Until the no end date.
Yeah.
Of actively pursuing, which you may never find.
So you're asking, what if there's a cost to it? What if there's a cost?
Even.
But let me address the cost aspect, because that may be something you're wondering. What if watching it entails some cost? So you are allowed to sell the donkey for cash and then hold on to the cash. That's an idea you can do. There is a story in the Talmud of Hanina ben Dosa that he said, I'm not going to substitute it for cash. So he substituted the chicken. He found eggs. He waited till they hatched. Now he had chickens. Then he substituted the chickens for goats and goats for cows. And then this guy came back 5 years later, and he had a whole herd of animals that Hanina ben Dosa gave to him. And Hanina took on the expense because he wanted to fulfill this mitzvah. But that's going above the letter of the law. That's not the requirement. You don't have to take on personal expense.
I wasn't
But
really thinking of the personal expense. I'm even thinking, what if you can't hold it? Then do you sell it? Like, in other words,
what do you mean, what if you
I
can't
don't
tell
have
them?
space for the goat or the chickens or, whatever. How do you hold on to it then?
It seems you have saying, what did you find? Give us an example. Let me.
Example could be, I found, in modern day times, someone's motorcycle, or their car, and I don't have room on my property to hold on to it safely, even at least.
Yeah.
It would be stolen, it would be.
Good question.
It would be destroyed.
Good question.
That's my question.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know.
Not so much the financial maintenance.
Okay, so practically how to do it, how it'll work, I have to think about that. I have to do some research. Okay, so now let's look at case study B. And this was also something that's wasn't intuitive to people. So you found a bracelet on the streets. So you have to do everything you can to find the owner. And if you did a reasonable effort to find the owner, you don't get to keep it. You hold on to it until the owner comes forward. Let's read the example that the Talmud says. Maimonides will write Maimonides how he writes it. Text 9. If an announcement or notification regarding the discovered item was made and the owner did not come forward to claim it, the item should remain in the possession of the finder until the arrival of Elijah the prophet. The prophet Malachi says that before Mashiach will come, Elijah the prophet will come and announce Mashiach is coming soon, and he'll also clarify for us all these doubts. So he'll tell us, oh, this item actually belongs to that person, and he'll help us solve all these doubts. So that's the Torah's requirement. Hold it until Mashiach comes. Are we saying it should go generation to generation? Your great grandchildren have to watch something that was found? So we'll get to that in a moment. Because let's look at the next point. Okay? This is where we get to the exceptions of the rules. Okay? In text 10a, the Torah, if you remember, the Torah said a donkey, a garment, and anything that a person might own. So if you just told us, why doesn't the Torah just say the phrase, anything a person might own? That includes a donkey, that includes a garment. Why does it give the detail and then the general statement. And this is very important tool the Talmud uses and says that's actually teaching us when we say everything, it doesn't really mean everything. It means everything that's similar to a donkey and a garment. Anything that fits into that class, that's what it's referring to. What fits into that class? Things that have a siman, things that are recognizable. In other words, if you find cash on the street, there's no way to identify the owner unless it's in an envelope that has a name on it or it's with credit cards. There's a siman here. There's signs that you can identify who this belongs to. But if this is an item that there's no obvious identification marks on it, then you can keep it. You can take it home with you. So when we said the bracelet, you have to return it. It depends what type of bracelet. If it's a bracelet that is so generic that there's a million of them in the world, then no one could really, how's someone going to give you a sign? But if it's something that's unique, someone could come forward and say, yeah, I lost my bracelet. It was here. So that's a sign. So let's read it in the words of Maimonides. By mentioning the example of a garment, the Torah teaches us a law. Every garment is unique and contains features by which it can be identified. And Maimonides is obviously speaking in his time when clothing wasn't mass produced, but even today, that clothing is mass produced, there's still signs and features. You see it in school lost and founds all the time. The parents know, oh, that item is mine because who else has this unique item? We therefore presume that its owner will seek its recovery and we are obligated to return it. This establishes a principle. Any article that has identifiable features is assumed to have an owner who seeks its recovery and must therefore be returned. By contrast, a lost article that no longer has owners who seek it because they have the spirit of its recovery belongs to its finders, even if it bears identifying features. So Maimonides just made a principle for us. If the owner despairs in its recovery, either because the item has no identifiable features, or for other reasons, then that owner removed the item from his network. He removed it from his network. So now his soul is not connected to the spark within that item anymore, because he despaired. She gave up. Once she gives up that association, it's not hers. But what if she's not aware that she lost it? Then she can't give up on something she didn't know. There has to be a conscious unnetworking. If you inherit items, but you don't know you inherited it, you still own it, right? You still own it, but you just don't know that you own it, right? So if you lose something, but you don't know that you lost it, you can't disown it because you didn't know that you lost it to disown it. But if you consciously despair, either because you lost something that has no identifiable features or for other reasons, therefore that item no more belongs to you. Okay? And that's text 10b. If you discover a lost item on the seashore within reach of the tide or in an area inundated by a flooding river, you may keep it. This applies even if the item has an identifying feature. This law is derived from the command to return an article that was lost to your fellow and you found it, implying that the obligation extends to any circumstance in which an article is lost to its original owner, but is likely to be found by others. This excludes an instance in which the item is assumed lost not only to its owner, but to all people. In such an instance, the owner certainly despairs of its recovery. If you lose your bag in the airport, you say, someone's going to find it because there's so many people in the airport. So I don't give up hope. I think maybe I'll be able to find someone in that airport that knows where it is. Maybe someone put it into lost and found. However, when I lose something in the ocean, I don't think anyone will come across it. I despair. So that's how I unload it from my spiritual network. And now when someone dives and finds something at the bottom of the ocean, even if it's an iPhone that has my name on the lock screen, doesn't have to return it. He's not obligated to return it. But just because there's no obligation doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do. There's just no obligation. And that's one area where this is different, where Torah is more lenient, so to speak, on a principle level than the other view. This idea of unloading things from your network, in most cultures, what do you mean? We know who the owner is, so you have to restore it. The Torah has this feature. No, if you unloaded it from your network, you gave up. You gave up on the item. That means that this item is, your soul is not connected to this item anymore. And now it's somebody else could bring it into their mission. They could put it onto their spiritual network. So, in the words of the Morale of Prague in text 11, let's go through a slide or two. Once a person has the spirit of recovering a lost item, their ownership of it dissipates. Their role has been completed and it's time for someone else to channel its spiritual energy. So in case study C, we remember that case? You came back later, the guy, they gave up hope. You saw that they gave up hope. Now you're legally entitled to keep it in that case. Although the finder is counseled to show kindness and go beyond the letter of the law and to return it. But the Torah works in principles. In principles, this is not on your network. But just because in principle, you can bring it into your possession, you could do a kindness and actually restore it to that person's network and ask him, hey, I found it, do you want it back? So let's read the words of the Maral, text 11. Your property is not a part of your body from which you cannot be separated. Rather, it is your possession, something external that belongs to you, right? It's yours, but it's not attached to you. Therefore, if you lose an item and it is no longer in your possession, and you have also removed it from your consciousness through abandoning the hope of its recovery, strict principles of ownership dictate that it is no longer yours, it's ownerless. And that's the mechanism that Torah says you're legally allowed to keep that necklace or that iPhone at the bottom of the ocean. No problem. But in text 12, the Code of Jewish Law writes, all the above accords with the letter of the law. Nevertheless, the good and proper course of action is to extend yourself beyond the letter of the law and return a lost item, even if its owner already despaired of its recovery. This concept of network, spiritual network, and the sparks actually explains a thing that if you learn Talmud with a Western background, secular background, and you learn Talmud or learn rabbinic text with a secular view, things can seem odd or backwards. But when you learn it with the Torah's outlook, it actually makes a lot of sense. So I'll give you an example. One example is the rabbinic language around betrothal and marriage is the words used of acquisition. You know, when a man acquires a wife, you say, this is crazy. What do you mean? Acquire? What is she, your property? But you misunderstand how Torah views property, and therefore you misunderstand this idea. When you own property, when you own an apple, do you have a right to just throw it in the garbage? From a secular point of view, yeah, it's your apple. You can do whatever you want. Why not? You want to throw it in the garbage, you can throw it in the garbage. From a Torah view, no, this has a soul connection to you. You can't just throw it out. It's part of your soul mission. You have to make sure it's utilized. It's good, and you have to protect it. You have to, and we'll see text to clarify this more. And the same thing is, it's a soul connection. When you marry someone, you're basically bringing them into your soul network. You're saying, we're now sharing our journey, our mission becomes a mission for the two of us. Our life's mission becomes joined. We're now on the same soul network. And our possessions are shared and things like that. Right? And there's many other examples of this in the Talmud where you come from a secular background and you read it and you say, oh, backwards. But if you don't know the Torah's value system, then it all makes sense. It's actually a beautiful concept. And the same thing in Pirkei Avot, he uses this phraseology, God acquires the Jewish people, God acquires the Torah, God acquires the land of Israel. What's this idea of acquiring? It's this idea of linking something onto your network. Like God says, the Jewish people and me, our identity is now merged. Whatever happens to them happens to me. Whatever happens to me happens. We're now merged identities. To the land of Israel, to Torah, it's all merged identity. Let's take a look at okay, so what's the difference between John Locke's view and the Baal Shem Tov's view? Right? John Locke's view is possessions are extensions of our body. We put in the work with our body, and therefore we have a connection to this land or to this product that we invested our physical energy into. But the Baal Shem Tov's view is that possessions are extensions of our souls. Okay? So now, let's look at an interesting mitzvah in the Torah that will now make a lot of sense. Let's look at text 14a, page 156. This is an interesting law in the Torah. When you lay siege to a city for an extended period of time as part of a battle to capture it, do not destroy its fruit-bearing trees. Now, Maimonides says, this prohibition is not restricted to fruit trees. Anyone that shatters utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, plugs a natural spring, or ruins food with destructive intent transgresses the Torah's prohibition, do not destroy. We are not allowed to destroy anything with destructive intent. Okay? Sometimes destruction is really an instructive intent. You know, you're taking down something to build something better, or for whatever person. But destroying things just for the sake of destroying, you have no right to do. You say, but I paid for it. It's mine. I can do whatever I want. No, it's not yours to do whatever you want. It's yours that it's on your soul network. And now you have to make sure it's utilized. Okay? So think about this idea as we go throughout the week, to be thinking about what are items that I have in my life? What are things that I have? And how can I elevate them? How can I use them to elevate myself? And vice versa. So we get in the car, we can think, one strategy is you buy a car, you think, I paid a lot of money for this car, I want to keep it nice and clean. So I don't want to offer too many people to use it, to get a ride with it. No, I want to keep it nice and clean. But if you have this Torah view, hold on, this car is on your soul network. What is this car here for? Is it only to get you to work, to your job? Or maybe it's also a mitzvah machine. It's to help you do mitzvahs. So you can help people get rides. The more people that use your car, the better. You now elevated your car. You brought joy to the world. You brought goodness to the world. You have your home. You could either be very careful to only invite adults into your home. You're not going to invite families with young kids because they can mess up your home. But you could think of the mitzvah of inviting guests into your home, and you actually say, good, my money went to this home, but now I'm getting more out of my dollar because look how many more mitzvahs I'm doing with my dollar. This house is now a bargain because I paid a lot of money, but look how many mitzvahs I'm doing with this. It's tremendous. So now all these possessions in our life could spark joy for us. So we shouldn't be looking at items and thinking, does this spark joy in me? We should be thinking, how can I make this item bring joy? And so it should be proactive. We should be thinking how to utilize everything and channeling everything back. And that's the exercise of the week. With that, we'll end. We need to value our possessions. We are entrusted with them for a reason.
Lesson 5. Beyond lawful ownership. 1. Jewish mysticism teaches us that ownership reflects a spiritual relationship between the owner and the possessions. Our belongings hold a spiritual energy that only we can harness. 2. The Jewish theory of soul-related ownership does not just provide a definition of ownership. It also informs our use of our property and our manner of relating to the property of others. 3. Jewish ownership laws are based on strict principles. As a result, Jewish law does not allow us to take someone else's property without advance permission, even if we're certain the owner would approve. 4. Jewish law is very stringent regarding the return of lost property, obligating us to proactively retrieve lost items and seek out the owner. This obligation has no end date. 5. The strict principles of Jewish law sometimes result in leniency as well, such as allowing us to keep a found item if circumstances make it clear that the original owner has despaired of its recovery. Nevertheless, we are encouraged to step beyond the strict letter of the law and return the item.
Okay, next week's lesson, I hope you'll join us. It's the final lesson of this course. It's beyond the presumption of innocence. Whenever we see people, how do we value them? We'll see very fascinating. It's unintuitive to us that were maybe raised without a Torah background, but very foundational values that we could squeeze out of interesting Torah laws and many interesting scenarios that we'll do next week. And that's it. And thank you for joining us for this week. And I'll be around for a few more minutes if you have any questions.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a wonderful. Bradley, before you sign off, and Barbara, the code for the CLEs is mitzvah. Mitzvah. Every lesson. Every lesson.